A very good morning to you folks. First, let me apologize for the late release of this week's episode. There are many factors behind the decision to delay the release of the show, as I will get to in a later segment. First, what a great week that I had being home with my bride. And sadly, my time at home is coming to a close as I'm headed out of state this afternoon for some coaching with a bunch of different teams than the ones I've been working with for the past 15 months. These new teams are part of a different subdivision of the super major in the oil and gas industry that is my main client. It will be quite the change of scenery for me as well. Although I'll be starting off my next series of engagements in the state of Texas, specifically in the Houston area, that will only be for a few days. The rest of the time, I will be training and coaching in Mississippi, eastern Louisiana, and western Arkansas. Most of my engagements will take place around the cities of Jackson and Meridian, Mississippi. As I alluded to a couple of weeks ago, I spent some time in this part of the country back in the late 80s. I'm pretty sure I won't recognize anything there in and around Meridian since it has been more than 3 decades since I was last there. These teams that I'll be working with are spread out all over the 3 states that I mentioned, so there will be some more windshield time on this 3-week engagement as well. More importantly, though, it won't be the dry and flat landscape like the Permian and Delaware basins in West Texas and East New Mexico that I spent most of last year and early this year working in. It will be a refreshing change. Then, after this 3-week engagement, my bride and I will be joining members of our church on a Footsteps of Paul pilgrimage in May. We are so looking forward to that, visiting the locations of the earliest churches in Christianity. The campaign will be kicking into high gear right after that pilgrimage, heading into the final stretch leading up to the August 1st primary, which there's already been an interesting yet unsurprising development in, as I will discuss later in the show as well. And it is a major part of the decision behind delaying this episode. During this past week, I had the opportunity to work with a marketing company to put together some videos that will be part of the campaign. The group of professionals that put all of this together are incredible. Eric and Marissa did such a wonderful job, and I cannot wait to put the finished product out there for the voters of the Tennessee House District 12 to see. Additionally, I've also scheduled some campaign meet and greet events for the times that I'm not out of state working. I will be sharing them on social media and mentioning them on the podcast. If you live here in House District 12, please come out to one of them. Share the information with your neighbors as well. In this week's episode, which I've entitled The Enemy at the Gates, we'll cover some of the tyrannical enemies of liberty. Keep in mind, though, the enemies of liberty are not just at the gates. They are already inside the gates. They just aren't recognized as the enemies of liberty because of the apathy of the voters. Those enemies inside the gates are often the establishment Republicans that have fooled the people into thinking they are allies, but they're only in it for themselves. And again, I will bring the receipts for that statement as well later in this show. Now, as usual, before we move on with the show, here comes the campaign disclaimer. The following content is approved by Larry Linton for TN12, candidate for the GOP nomination for Tennessee House of Representatives, District 12. Larry Linton, Treasurer. Now, let's get on with this week's episode of the Liberty, Leadership, and Lies podcast. Welcome to the Liberty, Leadership, and Lies podcast. On this show, we will discuss the assaults on our liberty by the very institution we the people created to secure our liberty. We will also compare and contrast the actions of people in leadership positions to the servant leadership that is needed to protect our God-given, constitutionally protected rights. Additionally, we will break down the many lies that elected and unelected officials in government and media spin every day in order to secure for themselves positions of power and influence that are antithetical to the system of government our founding fathers created and passed down to us. Your host on this program is Larry Linton, a 30-year veteran of the United States Navy who also runs his own leadership consulting company. He is also a candidate for the Republican Party's nomination to represent Tennessee's House District 12, which includes Gatlinburg, Pigeon Forge, Pittman Center, Weirs Valley, Seymour, and parts of Sevierville, and most of Sevier County. So here is your host, Larry Linton. All right, folks, I am glad to be back with you this week. Once again, I want to offer my apologies for delaying this week's episode by a day. Although I devoted most of my time and energy these past few days to making up for the time that I lost with my bride on that 5 week schedule I was on, I felt that I owed it to you, the audience, to give a good show. So I delayed it by a day to make sure I provided a good product. Now, I'll update the audience of what went down during this hectic week at another time. In this show, I want to identify just some of the enemies of liberty we face daily. Additionally, before I forget, I need to let you all know that I've decided to not produce any episodes in the week we are out of the country as well as the following week. Yep, I will be taking a 2 week break from the show to ensure that I get everything out of this trip that I can. So there will be no episodes released on the 13th and 20th of May. I would like to encourage the audience to go back and either listen to your favorite episode or start from the beginning and catch up on the entire program. I really hope you understand. But now there will be the occasional social media posts, though, as well as blog entries, but they will either be focused on the campaign or on the excursion that Denise and I will be on while we're retracing the footsteps of the Apostle Paul in Greece. It will be exciting to visit the sites of the earliest churches in Christianity. For now, though, let's get into this week's show and talk about not only the enemies of liberty at the gates, but also the enemies of liberty that are inside the gates. Not often given much thought, some of the biggest enemies of our freedom comes in the form of either legislation at the state or central government level, regulations, as well as the taxes we pay. In our constitutional republic, liberty is a foundational principle enshrined in the Constitution and revered as a core value by all of the legal citizens. However, the erosion of liberty is an ongoing concern, and it's manifested through a myriad of manners, as I just mentioned. So often, and for so long now, our liberty is often eroded through legislative, regulatory, and fiscal measures at both the state and federal levels. Tennessee, like many states in the Republic right now, grapples with its own set of challenges regarding individual freedoms, while the central government in Washington, D.C., that's filled with the uniparty, the new aristocracy. That level of government imposes its own many and varied burdens on the nation as a whole. The enemies of liberty at our gates can be discovered through an examination of the many laws passed, their accompanying regulatory burdens, as well as the fiscal policies that are sold to the public as quote unquote investment. It should be apparent, but only to those that have thrown off the apathy that our republic is in a death grip right now of, that the many erosions of our liberty are multifaceted issues that demand that we, the people, pay attention, and we need to exercise extreme vigilance with anything the deep state or the administrative state engages in. At the state level, our beloved volunteer state faces a range of legislative measures that it often impinges upon our individual liberty. This includes laws that are currently being considered in the General Assembly right now, as well as those that are already on the books. While regulations are often sold as something our elected representatives state are intended to protect the public's well-being, they often, either inadvertently or on purpose, restrict our personal freedoms. For example, occupational licensing requirements. While aimed at ensuring professional standards, it can create barriers to entry for aspiring entrepreneurs and limit consumer choice. The flip side of that coin is how the General Assembly has now allowed non-citizens the ability to attain those same professional licenses in the state, increasing the attraction of the illegal immigration magnet. Regulatory burdens in Tennessee also extend beyond occupational licensing to encompass environmental regulations, zoning laws, business permitting processes, and eminent domain issues. While these regulations often serve a legitimate purpose, that's what they state anyway, they stifle, or they can stifle, innovation and economic growth, hindering our ability to pursue livelihoods freely. Conversely, lawmakers in Nashville can also write these regulations to pick and choose winners in the marketplace. The biggest winners are often the biggest donors to the people writing these pieces of legislation. These laws and regulations that are put into place, they create an excessive bureaucracy and the accompanying red tape which often, again, deters entrepreneurship and limits the ability of small businesses to compete in the marketplace. Unless, of course, you have those friends in high places. This behavior by the government is what is undermining economic liberty on the state and national level. On the national level, the erosion of liberty is evident through a complex web of legislation, regulation, and fiscal policy. The growth of the administrative state, again, which is just a polite word for the deep state, has resulted in a proliferation of regulations that permeate every aspect of our lives. Regulations that come from many of the three-letter agencies that usurp the power of the legislative branch. This is by design, so that the regulations become so entrenched in the everyday fabric of our lives. From healthcare and education to finance and energy, federal agencies wield significant authority to promulgate rules that carry the force of law, often with minimal oversight from elected representatives. Hope you keyed in on that bit there. Often with minimal oversight from our elected representatives. This minimal oversight, it's on purpose, folks. Why would it be on purpose, you may ask? Well, consider this. If it is detrimental to us, the voters, and our liberty, just who does it benefit? It's always about following the money, people. And in the case of the government, be it state or national, if you follow the money, you discover that the money first comes from us, the taxpayers. Like I always said, because the government first must take it from us for somebody else's benefit. This regulatory overreach almost always undermines accountability and infringes upon individual liberty or individual freedom in our constitutional republic. Moreover, the federal tax code imposes a heavy burden on American taxpayers, especially those that have the wherewithal to be the job creators in our nation, with complex provisions and loopholes that favor special interests and rob the taxpaying citizens of their sweat equity through coercion. Now, while some taxes are necessary to fund essential government services, our country's overly burdensome tax system, it restricts individual financial freedom and it inhibits economic mobility. Just what are essential government services, though? Well, those that would be listed in the enumerated powers clause of the U.S. Constitution at the national level. Those are the very specific and very limited powers the states handed over to the central government when they created that government. Well, I've come up on a hard break right here, folks. I'll close out my thoughts on legislation, regulations, and taxes and how they are the enemy, just a few of the enemies at the gates looking to erode our liberty after this next break. And we're back. In closing out the discussion of the previous segment, let me summarize it for a bit. First, though, I would like to point out again at this time and really ask this question. Who or what is the largest employer in the United States of America? If you guessed the central government in Washington, D.C., you would be correct. If our taxes are supposed to fund only essential government functions, the enemies of freedom and liberty in our states and nation's capital figured out that they just need to grow the size and scope of government so they could impose more regulations, fees, and taxes on us. With that increase in the size and scope of government functions comes an ever increasing level of government spending. It is one of those self-licking ice cream cones that we've discussed often on this show before. For decades now, that government spending has often exceeded government revenue through the taxes that they confiscate from us and the fees they charge us, which has now resulted in an unsustainable level of debt that encumbers future generations with the consequences of this fiscal irresponsibility. The erosion of liberty in Tennessee and the United States writ large is a multifaceted or multi-pronged attack by the Uniparty. Again, that's made up of the establishment Republicans working hand in glove with the communists. Together, these evil, power-hungry people drive legislation, create regulations, and they also write the fiscal policy of the country. Very few of these measures the new aristocracy takes are well-intentioned, and even those that are, well, they always always have intended and unintended consequences that diminish our individual freedoms and undermine the principles upon which our nation was founded. To safeguard liberty for future generations, it is imperative that policymakers at both the state and national levels, they are forced by us, the voters, to prioritize the protection of individual rights and strive for a balance between regulation and freedom, with freedom being the priority. Only through our vigilant oversight, along with active participation in our system of self governance and a commitment to upholding constitutional principles, can the erosion of liberty be stopped and then reversed. Upholding constitutional principles is definitely something that the Uniparty will not do. We bore witness to that on the national stage with the renewal of FISA in Congress last week. And in the final segment of this week's show, I'll bring you the receipts on how the establishment Republicans here in Tennessee, particularly in Sevier County, will forego constitutional principles and do whatever it takes to ensure their candidate wins elections. But speaking of the Sevier County Republican Party, let's first speak about the most of the Republican Party in general and the role they play in the erosion of our liberty. In our political system, establishment Republicans have often portrayed themselves as champions of liberty and limited government. All of you and I know, though, a closer examination reveals that their actions have frequently contributed to the erosion of our individual freedoms and the expansion of government power. From their support for our intrusive surveillance programs like the FISA program that we've already discussed, to their complicity in growing regulatory burdens, these establishment Republicans have played a significant role in undermining the very principles they claim to uphold. One area where establishment Republicans have contributed to the erosion of liberty is in the realm of national security and surveillance. In the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks, Republicans, the Uniparty Republicans, were instrumental in passing legislation such as the Patriot Act, which granted the government broad authority to conduct warrantless surveillance and collect vast amounts of data on American citizens, violating the Fourth Amendment. Of course, it wasn't sold to the American public like that. It was sold to us as a vital tool to prevent the terrorists from overseas, outside the borders of our republic. Remember, these so-called Republicans argued that these measures were necessary for national security. Even though many people raised concerns about privacy rights and the potential for government overreach, and despite promises to protect civil liberties, these establishment Republicans have often prioritized the security interests over individual freedom, enabling the expansion of the surveillance state. Furthermore, the establishment Republicans have frequently aligned themselves with powerful corporate interests, leading to policies that favor big businesses at the expense of us ordinary Americans. It happens in Washington, D.C., as well as in Nashville. By prioritizing the interests of corporations and special interests, these establishment Republicans have perpetuated a system of crony capitalism that undermines free market principles and tilts the playing field in favor of the privileged few, much in the same way communists have done for decades all across the fruited plains. Moreover, establishment Republicans have often been complicit in the growth of the administrative state, despite their professed commitment to a limited government that they've worked hand in glove with the communists in growing the size and scope of the government. Through their support for expansive executive authority, keep in mind, the Republican supermajority in Nashville, they have still not done anything to limit the governor's ability to issue executive orders like the ones he used during the scamdemic. Additionally, through their support in the expansion of regulatory agencies, the establishment Republicans have enabled the proliferation of regulations that stifle our economic growth and infringe upon our liberties. This is like enemies of liberty on enemies of liberty, so to speak. We discussed in the first segment how those regulations are robbing us of our liberty. Rather than challenging the bureaucratic overreach of federal agencies, which is a stated platform of the Republican Party, these establishment rhinos or establishment Republicans have too often acquiesced to the status quo, perpetuating a system of regulatory capture that serves the interests of entrenched insiders at the expense of you and I, ordinary citizens. These establishment Republicans have played a significant role in the erosion of liberty through their support for policies that expand government power, undermines privacy rights, and as well as prioritizing corporate interests over the needs of American people, all to maintain their positions of power. Despite their rhetoric of limited government and individual freedom, their actions have often fallen short of these ideals, perpetuating a system of cronyism and regulatory overreach. To truly uphold the principles of liberty, it is essential for the voting Republicans to reject the status quo and embrace policies and candidates that will work to empower the individuals, limit government intrusion, and promote economic opportunity for everyone. Now, did I mention that one of the three candidates for the GOP nomination to represent House District 12 in the Tennessee General Assembly is one of those establishment Republicans? Here is a clue to who that candidate is. One of the candidates is a college student without a history of government employment or serving in elected office. Another candidate does have a history of government service, but as a 30-year veteran of the U.S. Armed Forces, he's also a small business owner that daily deals with the regulatory and tax burdens imposed by the communists and the establishment Republicans. The third candidate, well, he has served in elected office for a quarter century now, at the level of government that is directly responsible for infrastructure of Sevier County. For the residents here in Sevier County, how is that working out for you? Only by challenging the entrenched interests that dominate Washington, Nashville, and Sevier County, these establishment Republicans will never be able to reclaim their credibility as defenders of liberty. They are nothing more than the flip side of the coin that has the communists on it as well. Okay, folks, we're up against another hard break. When we come back on the other side, we'll talk about the specific actions of the Sevier County Republican Party that violated the bylaws of the Tennessee State Republican Party. So hang on, we'll be right back. Okay, folks, we're back to the final full segment of this week's episode. In this segment, we'll talk about another enemy at the gates and then the enemy inside our gates. Another enemy of our liberty that's at the gates, and it's a tool enjoyed by both the communists and the establishment Republicans, is something that can be referred to as the veil of secrecy. You know, transparency is a cornerstone of governance in our constitutional republic. It's essential for holding elected officials accountable and safeguarding our individual liberties. However, the actions of many state and federal government officials often occur behind closed doors, shielded from public scrutiny and accountability. This lack of transparency not only undermines the trust of the electorate, but also contributes to the erosion of our liberty by enabling unchecked power and fostering an environment of secrecy and privilege. It has also driven the apathy that has infected the voters of our republic for over a century now. It has left the people feeling helpless and causes them to no longer participate in our system of self-governance. At both the state and central government levels, elected officials frequently operate without adequate transparency, making decisions that impact the lives of millions of Americans, Tennesseans included, behind their veil of secrecy. This could take many forms, from closed-door negotiations on legislative matters to undisclosed conflicts of interest that influence policymaking. Without transparency, citizens are left in the dark about the motivations behind government actions and are unable to hold their representatives accountable for their decisions. Just look at the voice votes, vice roll call votes that are quite prevalent in the Tennessee House of Representatives and its various committees. Again, the proliferation of closed-door negotiations and backroom deals in policymaking exacerbates the lack of transparency in government. From budget negotiations to crafting major legislative initiatives like this free school freedom bill in Tennessee, important decisions are often made behind closed doors with little input or oversight from the public. This not only undermines the policy and lawmaking process, but also enables special interests to exert undue influence over policymaking at the expense of our liberty. Furthermore, the lack of transparency extends to the operations of central government agencies and state bureaucracies, where decisions that impact individual liberties are often made without public input or accountability. From regulatory rulemaking to enforcement actions, government agencies wield significant power over the lives of citizens, yet their actions are often shrouded in secrecy. Everything our government is doing right now, at all levels, is exactly what our founding fathers fought a war of independence, an insurrection against the King of England. They fought this war to secure the liberty of every future generation of Americans. Without transparency, the citizens, we have limited recourse to challenge government overreach or hold officials accountable for abuses of power. All right, enough about that. Now let's talk about the enemy that is hard to recognize. We've mentioned them throughout this episode as the establishment Republicans. But because they put on a thin veneer of the political party that is supposed to be defenders of the constitutional principles and our founding documents, they have fooled the people into believing that they will fight for our liberty. But ultimately, they only represent themselves and work their hardest at keeping themselves in positions of power. And by doing that, they play right into the communist hands and begin the slow boil of the frog in the pot of water. If you've been following my campaign over the past week or so, you may know what I'm about to talk about. Although the press release for my campaign did not go into too many details, because I had to keep it short enough to print or read during a news break, well, I have the time and the platform right here to fully explain the situation. As I just mentioned, I sent that press release to Tennessee Conservative News, and so far, they are the only news outlet to publish it. I also sent it to 3 major broadcast news stations out of Knoxville, which is the television media market that covers Sevier County. Again, I also sent it to the Knoxville newspaper, in addition to the Mountain Press newspaper here in Sevier County. So far, nothing but crickets. What is not surprising, though, is the lack of response from the Tennessee Republican Party. You longtime listeners may recall the exchanges that I had with the chairman of the state Republican Party, Mr. Scott Golden, about this time last year, well, just a bit over a year ago, when the Sevier County Republican Party was going through the reorganization process. Needless to say, Mr. Golden is probably not my biggest fan. Anyway, I'm also getting crickets from the state GOP as well in this matter. One would think if a subordinate unit of an organization was violating the state organization's bylaws, the leaders of that organization would be a bit upset. Of course, that would be a normal organization. Very little about the Tennessee State Republican Party could be considered normal. What I'm going to do right now is share a presentation I put together that really explains the shenanigans that went on in a really simple way. So hold on a second and I can get this ready for you. All right, folks, let's go through the presentation I built up. All right, so what you're seeing there is the press release that I released to, like I said, Tennessee Conservative News, as well as local newspapers, local television stations, and a couple of local radio stations. So far, nothing but crickets. All right, so on the right side of the screen there, you see a sheet right out of the Tennessee GOP bylaws. But the highlighted portion there says neither the SEC as a body, nor the officers, nor the TRP's paid staff members, nor a county Republican Party or CEC as a body, nor county Republican Party chairman shall endorse a Republican candidate in a contested primary election. For those of you who aren't aware of this, I'm in a contested primary election. There's myself, there's another young man named Christian Brown, and there's the county commissioner, Fred Ashley. So it is a contested, there's 3 candidates in this primary. Next, let's go into, it's a copy of the Sevier County Republican Party's meeting minutes from the reorganization. The highlighted portion there shows that there was only one bona fide candidate, because I was disqualified, running for the chairman position, and that's Michael Hodges Jr., who is the sheriff of Sevier County. He was unanimously approved as the newly elected chairman of the Sevier County Republican Party. Next, let's get into this. This is a photo of somebody sent me of the flyer that just recently was delivered in their mail. It's an invitation to a fundraiser for candidate Fred Ashley. I highlighted there on the video or the photo, host committee. So now this would not be problematic in and of itself. Any candidate can host a fundraiser, free or otherwise, anywhere they want to. What gets to be problematic is what we're going to show on the next page. This is the back of that flyer right here. It shows everybody that's part of that host committee that's invited people to show up for Fred Ashley's fundraiser. Oh, shows Commissioner Mike and Melissa Chambers. Okay. He is a member of the Sevier County GOP CEC or County Executive Committee. There is Sheriff Michael Hodges, who is the chairman of the Sevier County Republican Party. And then down here is Sevier County Mayor Larry Waters. Let's get on to the next page so I can show you the bona fides. Mike Chambers, Larry Waters are members of the Sevier County Executive Committee for the Republican Party. And at these meeting minutes, look at that. Well, Fred Ashley made a motion to adjourn. These all people are thick as thieves, of course. Now, here's where I come up with my questions to ponder, right? Will the Tennessee GOP or members of the state executive committee take any action for this clear violation of the Tennessee GOP bylaws? Probably not. State GOP Chairman Scott Golden, along with my two District 8 SEC representatives, they were notified of this violation on the 9th of April, and I still have not received word from them yet. And as I mentioned, the Tennessee Conservative News, they are the only print, broadcast, or radio media that has decided to share this information. Well, folks, that was as plain as I can put this violation, and we'll see. I doubt anything will happen. But that's it for this segment. Right after this next break, we'll come back for the closing and some wisdom from God's Word. Don't go away. I'll be right back. Okay, folks, we're back for this week's closing segment. And today's wisdom from God's Word comes to us from the book of Joshua, chapter 1, verse 9. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. You know, I'm quite sure that many of you are discouraged right now. I mean, why not? You instinctively recognize that our own government has become the biggest enemy to our liberty that any foreign adversary could have ever dreamed of becoming. And yes, this enemy, our government, the one that hates us, our government is robbing us of our liberty without firing a shot. As I mentioned, we are those proverbial frogs in a boiling pot of water. Even the political party that was supposed to be our biggest ally in this fight against government tyranny here at home, well, it turns out that many of them are actually allies of the communists, the people that have pure evil in their hearts and only worship power. The communists, liberals, Democrats, and establishment Republicans have sold the citizens of our great state and our nation for their 30 pieces of silver and the chance at even more power and control over our lives. This evil alliance has slowly taken over nearly every institution in our great republic. It can be discouraging and disheartening to realize that. What should help us not to be discouraged is this. We do know how this story ultimately ends. Knowing that, though, does not mean we should not fight against the evil that is happening right now. I recently completed a Bible study plan that talked about how each of us should be putting on the armor of God. Do you think our Creator provided us with this armor to just sit around and wait for the story to reach His conclusion? Of course not. We put on the armor of God so that we can engage in battle, not to sit on the sidelines, not fighting, not engaging the enemy. We should not be sitting around waiting and just wanting our government to leave us alone. I've told you all this before. And the followers of this podcast need to tell everybody they know that are just wanting to be left alone. Long gone are the days when our government, at the federal, state, and local level, long gone are the days when they just leave us alone. They have sneaked into every aspect of our lives. There's not a minute that goes by in our sleeping or waking moments that our government isn't doing something to us. Not a single minute. The only way to stop that is to get involved. Just wanting to be left alone is tantamount to admitting defeat and crawling in a corner somewhere just waiting to die. You may be alive, but you are not living. You are not passing along to your children, grandchildren, and every future generation a country founded upon the principle of individual liberty. Your lack of contribution is adding additional chains to their neck, to their wrists, to their ankles. You are allowing the government to make sure that you and your posterity remain as slaves to them. For my fellow residents of Tennessee House District 12, which again, it's Gatlinburg, Pigeon Forge, Wears Valley, Pittman Center, Seymour, parts of Sevierville, and all the spaces in between, I am humbly asking you for your support and your vote in this upcoming primary. It will be a hard fight with the odds stacked against me by the Good Old Boy Network that has done everything in their power to keep me and others here in the county that believe, as I do, away from their levers of power. This past week's activity is just a small example of how they have bent or broken the rules so they and their clique can maintain their own hands on the levers of power and control here in Sevier County. Rest assured, more will come out. The truth always does, doesn't it? All I can ask is that you all take a stand in the arena with me, especially this election cycle. Until next week, Reveille, it's time to wake up.